College Justin Reyes. I'm going to Justin and I are going to be moderating the panel, but leaving most of the important talking time to the students. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started?
As Anthony said, I'm Justin Rose. I'm in the political science department, also African studies. And I'm here at the CFP Fellow, working with faculty research fellow. So I'm very happy to take place in the panel with these great students.
Great. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each of the student panelists, and they have each prepared a few brief remarks that they're going to make. And then when they have completed that, Justin and I will help facilitate a question and answer with you all. So please feel free to, while you're listening, to be thinking of questions or just comments that you'd like to share with the rest of the group. We have a mic that will walk around that we'll probably use for questions because the acoustics in here sometimes it can be difficult to hear. I don't think that mic is there. Okay, so I'm going to start over on my far right and introduce the students. First we have Michaela Gaffney. She's a senior psychology major with a double minor in women's studies and Africana studies. Her research interests center on examining the role of intersectionality in everyday life. And Michaela has aspirations that I'm sure she will realize to become a clinical psychologist. Next we have Terrence Dandridge, who is a senior double major in political science and business. Terrence has a particular interest in political science in studying the nature of presidential power and the executive branch. He's also a member of the Muhlenberg College football team and on the social judicial panel. Lindsay Doan is a senior political science major and a women's studies minor. She's been active in many theatrical productions on campus, including the Studying Diversity Project, which most of us are familiar with. This past summer, Lindsay attended the new leadership conference at Chatham University. It's an event sponsored by the Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics, so I'm sure that experience has informed her remarks today. And then finally, we have Nasha Luis Rodriguez. She's a senior psychology major with a women's studies minor. She's been very active in Comunidad Latina since her sophomore year. Her research interests center on social justice, especially as they relate to intersectionality. So if you can help me welcome our student panelists, and then we will
But over the past few years, my background and interest in women's studies and Africana studies has really pushed me to look at everyday interactions such as experience and media coverage through a critical lens, both questioning and considering the impact of race, gender, class, and sexual preference, and how they mold and how we perceive both ourselves and the world around us. I've taken a lot of interest in examining these factors, specifically race, and the current election. When Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, there seemed to be this sentiment among whites that electing a black president proved to be in a post-racial society. I think it's really a testament to how we currently view and discuss race. We're taught from a very young age to embrace the colorblind ideology, which is the view that everyone is equal and that we should minimize these differences. Whites desperately cling to this ideology because it both affirms their identity as non-racist, as they're taught to believe that talking about race makes you racist. And this also allows them to avoid any guilt associated with inequalities that they may see apparent between these racial groups. The major flaw with this approach is that race is impossible to ignore. It's not only visual, but it also is deeply ingrained within our social structure. So if we can't create an open and meaningful dialogue about race, it makes it harder to not only identify with racism, to challenge the damaging racial stereotypes that often implicitly affect us, but it also prevents us from dismantling it. The question is, does this ideology have an effect on the election? I believe it does. For a country that claims to adopt a colorblind ideology, I think it's hard to deny that race isn't being brought up, whether overtly or covertly. Even when you type Obama and race into Google, the search yields countless articles dealing with the role of race and racism in the election. While neither party typically addresses race explicitly, they use coded language which is clearly used in compliance with the colorblind ideology. Race is brought up without actually mentioning race. An example of this coded language is this enormous focus on the legitimacy of the president's nationality. Instead of outright referring to Obama as not white, he's referred to as un-American. This example of coded language doesn't necessarily sound racially charged, but its implied meaning makes it racialized. These coded remarks aren't even limited to one party. Earlier this year, Vice President Biden was quoted saying, "I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy." By referring to the president as basically an anomaly, Biden too inadvertently sends a message that being articulate, bright, and clean runs contrary to what's expected of African Americans. This language does significant damage not only because it offends a particular racial group, but its covert nature makes it impossible to point it out as a racist remark. The instances of coded racism are detrimental not only because of their oppressive nature, but also because of the threat they pose to affecting the unconscious. As consumers of media, we're constantly exposed to these racially coded interactions, and often without any awareness. This implicit nature seems to have the greatest potential to impact our subconscious, how we perceive, and ultimately how we choose to evaluate people. In terms of the election, without having the ability to question and examine how racism impacts our perceptions and opinions, we can't help but be impacted by our implicit attitudes when voting. The focus around gun control after the Aurora shooting is a good example of this phenomenon. There seemed to be this huge backlash and fear that Obama was going to take our guns, when in actuality Bush was a lot more lenient on gun laws was a lot more stricter on gun laws than Obama was. These unconscious influences aren't necessarily clear. It could mean someone may have a gut feeling of being less comfortable with one candidate versus the other. Overall, I think it's fair to say that race is in fact relevant in this election, whether we're consciously aware of it or not.
How you doing today? I will be explaining how Mitt Romney and Barack Obama actually had different views in terms of individualism and how America became prosperous and how that will affect their economic plans and what they think should be in a budget and what should be cut. And I also want to explain how race, and especially in 2012, will be affected in terms of the minority and majority votes, because they especially explained in 2008 that Barack Obama dominantly captured the minority votes, especially among African Americans, 95%, which was probably, from what I know of research, was the top among African Americans to come out and vote. And also the percentage of turnout percentage. Now, in Mitt Romney's case, he hasn't done so well gathering and relating to women's voters, and also he has done a great job at especially getting to the white vote. They explained that about 61%. If he can gain that percentage of voters for the election of 2012 and be able to create some type of swing of women votes, then yeah, he can be able to capture the election of 2012. Now, in the Obama case, I read up on an article, it was about 80 to 40% vote turnout, whereas the 80% coming from the minority vote, and 40% was amongst the white vote for the 2012 election. Obama did a great job with relating to the middle class in 2008 to win over John McCain. But in this election, as you know, Mitt Romney was very skillful at his economic plan. If you guys know, he was very prosperous and Bain Capital, and so he actually has a good strategy at developing good economic plan, which as we all, when we graduate, the students here will definitely are looking for good jobs. So, but when I saw President Obama, he actually been struggling with the economy at this point. It has, rebounded from the recession, but it hasn't really came back as we would like it to. So I will get into how I will explain to you and answer questions, if any, on a particular issue of how race and how race could play out in this election, and does it matter amongst the majority and minority vote, and the difference of the ways in which it can play out.
I didn't get my own microphone, so I gotta share with Terrence. So we've heard two comments so far, mostly about race, and I'd like to focus more on women and gender. So far in this really long campaign process, with only 5 more days to go, we've heard a lot about pitting social issues against economic issues. And a lot of people are saying, oh, we should only focus on economic issues during a recession. Let's put social issues on the back burner. And other people are saying, no way, you can't say that your taxes are more important than my civil liberties. So, for example, someone said on the internet, I can't remember who, but putting social issues before economic issues at this particular point in time is like getting caught in a burning building because you couldn't decide what shirt to wear while evacuating. So let's put the fire out first and give ourselves the luxury of having time to debate social issues. So that's kind of one camp of thought. And then have you guys seen Doug Wright's Facebook status? It went viral the other day. He's a Pulitzer-winning playwright. And he said, I wish my moderate Republican friends would simply be honest. They all say they're voting for Romney because of his economic policies, tenuous and ill-formed as they are, and that they disagree with him on gay rights. Fine. Look me in the eye, speak with a level, clear voice, and say, my taxes and take-home pay mean more than your fundamental civil liberties, the sanctity of your marriage, your right to visit an ailing spouse in the hospital, your dignity as a citizen of this country, your health care, your right to inherit, the mental welfare and emotional well-being of your youth, and your very personhood, which was incredibly strong, and it's really amazing that this guy came out and said this. So you've got these two camps of thought. Some people think we should focus on economic issues first, and then other people think that social issues are just as important. And obviously the media and campaign ads have caught on to this as well. For example,
I want to talk to you about women.
And about Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney's for ending funding to Planned Parenthood, including cancer screenings.
He said he'd overturn Roe v. Wade.
We have Republicans trying to redefine rape, trying to force women to undergo invasive ultrasounds. If you think that this election won't affect you and your life, think again. Vote. Vote. Vote for Barack Obama. Who's on that or political action is responsible for the content of this advertisement. I want to talk to you about women.
sorry, you already saw that. So what's interesting about this ad that I noticed was Kerry Washington said, when talking about Romney, he says he'll overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, Kerry Washington knows, and all of us know, that Mitt Romney cannot single-handedly overturn a Supreme Court case. But what can he do? And my question that I'd like to pose today is, why do we care about what our president thinks about social issues if he can't really do a lot about them? I argue that the president actually can do a lot about social issues. That's up for debate, and that's why we're going to have a cool discussion. But I think there are 3 main things that the president can do in terms of defining policy about social issues. First, the president will appoint Supreme Court justices, which is huge. Obama has already appointed 2, both women, one Hispanic, which is awesome, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 79 years old, so a lot of people think she's going to retire within the next 4 years, and she's a Democrat, so if Obama gets elected again, it should be in her best interest to probably do so. Also, Scalia and is it Scalia? Well, there's 2 Republicans. I think it's Scalia and Kennedy, and they're both 76. So if Obama gets elected again, they could hold out until they're 80, I don't know. but you just never know. So theoretically, Obama could, if he is elected for 8 years, he could appoint 5 Supreme Court justices, which is huge because that means a majority in the court. So people often forget that the president does have that kind of power, and it's really important. And also, social cases are going to come up in the Supreme Court regardless of whether you're in a recession or not. So just because you're in a recession doesn't mean that social issues are just going to halt and then we can only focus on economic issues. Secondly, the president can use the presidency as kind of a bully pulpit to basically set the tone for what he wants the country to think about. And he has this platform that he can use to really make his ideas heard. So if you have a president that is anti-gay marriage, for instance, and you're a gay person in the United States, and you're sitting there thinking, wow, my leader thinks that I'm less of a citizen. What is that going to do to the mentality of people in your country and to the youth if you look at your president and realize that he doesn't respect you as much as a citizen? Or maybe he does, and what does that say? And I think that's really important. And thirdly, the president can pass and veto bills, which is huge. People think, oh, these social issues, it's just up to Congress. Yeah, well, there are checks and balances, so the president has a lot of sway over this stuff. So, the next 4 years, regardless of who's elected president, the president is going to have to make a lot of major decisions, obviously on the economy, but social issues aren't going to halt and they aren't going to cease to be issues just because we're in a recession. So I think we should care about social issues in this election.
I'm talking about the importance of the Latino vote in this election. Latinos are the fastest growing ethnic group in the country, which is part of the reason that it's really important for the candidates to appeal to them. There are 24 million Latinos who are eligible to vote in this election. Unfortunately, the turnout rate for Latinos have been historically a lot lower than that. Only about 10 to 12 million Latinos are expected to come and actually vote next week. So that's kind of a problem. They make up 11% of the nation's eligible voters, which is a big portion. So they are into the election. Recently, politicians on both camps have been trying to make efforts to appeal to the Latino voters through doing different things, like, for example, learning Spanish or going to places like Puerto Rico to visit and talk to the eligible voters about what's going on in public policy and things like that. Some of the reasons that people feel that the turnout rate for Latinos isn't close to the number of people who actually can vote is that they are a younger population, and younger voters tend to not come out and vote as much as the older voters. Also, there is more than half of the actual Latino population in the U.S. is not eligible to vote, either because of their age or their status as immigrants, which brings us to one of the larger topics of discussion for the election, which is the immigration policy. Things like the DREAM Act are very important in terms of what the country can do for the younger Latinos in the future. But one of the problems is that Latinos aren't necessarily as invested in talking about immigration, but care a lot more about what is said about the immigration policies. For example, people were upset with calls to self-deport immigrants and things of that nature. What's interesting is that although Latinos they do support making the path to citizenship more accessible, they aren't putting as much effort to get out there and make those changes, and that's why the current candidates have been trying to talk to those populations about other things, like, for example, economics. Latinos are one of the hardest hit populations in terms of the recession, so it's been one of the bigger selling points to talk about how to bring up the economy. So yeah, one of the things that is also important about this is that Latinos are present in a lot of these states that are swing states, and they have a high population in those swing states. So for example, Florida, Nevada, and Colorado are very, very important states in this election, and their vote and their voices are going to be really important.
If you think that you can project your voice, then you don't need to use the microphone, but we do have it and we can walk around with it, and if you think that would be better, it's just sometimes hard to hear. So does anyone want to get started? Can you tell us your name?
Hi, I'm Sarah Joya. Thank you guys for giving this talk. It's been really helpful. So I know Ashley is talking about how the candidates have been trying to get a Latino vote, and I know in recent weeks, especially, the candidates have been working really hard to get the women's vote. And I was just wondering what you guys think, or how effective you think that's going to be in swaying women voters, if you think that's going to worth their time. Obviously, the women's vote is really important, but if you think that these efforts to try to sway women are going to be actually effective.
I'll take that one. That's a great question. I think that whole issue is fascinating personally, because what does it mean to get the women's vote? You're basically homogenizing women. I don't understand how you can do that, because there are so many women who are pro-life, for example, and there are so many women that are pro-choice too, and a lot of women don't even care about abortion. The media seems to think that all women care about is women's reproductive rights, and that's not entirely true. A lot of women only want to focus on the economy and think that stuff isn't important, and other women feel the opposite. So I think, though, that women are leading with Obama. I've read that a lot. I don't know. I'm a woman, so I can just tell you what I think. I think Obama is just a lot more appealing to women in general than Romney is. I think Obama just appears to be a lot more open and accessible, and that's one of the reasons why I'm voting him. One of the reasons why I'm voting him. One of the many reasons. But yeah, you're going to find though that women are going to vote for Romney and Obama. So.
I actually want to follow up with that. I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that you're trying to get these votes at this point in time, when it's down to the last few weeks, because one of the issues that Latinos are struggling with right now is the idea that they're trying to appeal, but there's a lot of flip-flopping. So it's like, was this as important to you last week when we were having these discussions about so-and-so kind of policy? So it's this idea that, can we actually trust the politicians who are gunning for us hard now and not before? So I'm curious as to what the women's votes, the women voters have been saying about that, and how they feel, whether or not they feel that the politicians are actually going to be held accountable for the things that they're saying in these final weeks. 5 days.
Hi, my name is Spencer Diamond. I'm a freshman. I have a question for who was the person that was talking about the marital equality.
I guess that would be.
Oh, you said that Mitt Romney has taken a stance against marriage equality for same-sex couples, but has he actually said anything like a soundbite that's occurred in the media or in interviews where he undermines the institution of citizenship for homosexuals, that he demoralizes them as people? Because I don't think he does. I don't think he believes in that.
Yeah, all I know is that he said that gay marriage undermines the sanctity of traditional marriage. So I feel like, just as far as I know, he's only talking about it in terms of traditional marriage. He thinks that somehow gay marriage will undermine that, which to me doesn't make any sense at all, but that's what he said. I don't know. Does anyone else know anything about that? That's all I got.
Hi, I'm Julia. I just want to on that question. I never. Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a freshman, and just to comment on Spencer's question, I know the Republican platform kind of really demoralized and really took offense to gay marriage, and that stance was really strong in their platform. And then again, that's just a part that's very extreme of the Republicans kind of putting the platform out there. So you can't really, you might not be able to take that with a grain of salt almost, but at the same time, they took it really seriously. Just something to think about.
Yes, I was just wondering how Mitt Romney has, I'm Michael Schneck. I'm just wondering how Mitt Romney, has he distanced himself from Mormon teachings on homosexuality? It hasn't been in the news much.
Say that, has he?
Has he distanced himself from Mormon teachings? Because Mormon teachings are clearly anti-gay. efficient measure?
Well, pretty much because you want to appeal to being more moderate and appeal to to more of the American I guess like middle class or who's more acceptance of gay marriages and things like that. So in order to become in that middle ground and appeal to more people, obviously religion and politics doesn't play this part on the same ground, and so. Probably before he became the nominee for the presidential candidate, he was probably more right wing and on that approach. But as he began, yes, he understood that he needed to appeal to more of American citizens.
Yeah, but I don't think Romney's position has changed at all, though, on gay marriage.
Thank you. My name is Kate Richmond, and I was hoping the panelists could, so far there's been a little bit of economic issues and social issues. So I was wondering if the panelists could speak a little more how that's somewhat of a false dichotomy, and that, of course, things like access to marriage provides economic benefits, or things like access to reproductive health, or maybe universal daycare, or things like that will impact the economics of individual families. So it's something you might be able to use that.
Okay, yeah, I think that social issues are economic issues. I'm so glad you asked that. A lot of people think they aren't, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive because, for instance, women's reproductive health, right? I mean, if you're able to have access to contraception, then you can have less children, and that's more money per child. So that's an economic issue as well. Also, marriage licenses, and you get tax breaks from the state if you're married. There's all kinds of benefits that are associated with being married. So if you've got two people who can't get married, they're at an economic disadvantage when you compare them to two people who are married. So I think they're very much linked.
Well, also immigration is a big one because of the fact that since one of the big complaints about the immigration policy is that, they're taking our money, all of these things, and if we made the path to citizenship a little bit more accessible for people, especially our younger generation, which there are people who've been brought here illegally, but it wasn't their choice. If we made that path to education, if we made that path and gave them the access to opportunities that we claim are important as Americans, then maybe we could have those people contribute to our economy.
I was just going to elaborate even further with that social and economic issues being related. You take into account healthcare, whether if you have equal status as far as marriage goes, that means other children will be qualified under their families, but if you don't have that, you may not have the access to that.
My name is Matt Pierce, I'm a freshman, and just going back to what Spencer was talking about same-sex marriage, I almost feel like Romney has kind of avoided the whole topic of same-sex marriage, especially trying to distance himself from his Mormon religion, trying to become more moderate as we get closer to the election. But I feel like in the VP debate, when the topic of both Joe Biden and Paul Ryan being Catholic came up, they asked about how they felt about same-sex marriage. And Joe Biden obviously was like, I feel like you should be able to have your own choice. But Ryan was kind of adamant about how he was very, very against same-sex marriage. So I feel like when people think about the Romney ticket, it's more about Ryan's view than his own.
I'd like to go back and piggyback on Professor Richmond's question. I wonder how a discussion on class would fit into this panel. And I always feel, as a police American, that conversations on class have always been excluded from a social, scientific, and political perspective. So your view on how class would know into some gender questions at this election?
They're intrinsically linked, in my opinion. I think that if you look at the makeup of our country and you look at the demographics, race and class are just something that is intrinsically linked. Even gender, the fact that women make less for the same job amount of work. Those things are intrinsically linked, so it's something that has to be brought up, but I think that it's part of the reason that this panel at least is focusing on the race-gender aspect, or at least myself, is because we tend to use class as a way to not talk about race.
We're all middle class.
Yes, and middle class is huge in America. You can be middle class and living in, you know, a small like townhouse, or you can be middle class and living in, you know, yeah. So it really depends. I think that it's hard to take into account every single one of those issues, but I think that class is definitely relevant, especially to Latinos. The fact that we are, the population has been affected so strongly by the recession. So I think it's something that has to be talked about. I don't know necessarily how to work it out.
I was just going to say that now when we get to the topic of candidates talking about the class war, pretty much either one of the candidates want to go into that field, and because there's always been a struggle in that field of study over time, and it can also create disadvantages in terms of individuals voting for them when we bring up the field of class. So.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I think class definitely comes into play in ways that we wouldn't expect. And one of the thoughts that I was thinking about yesterday at my internship, we were talking about the effects of the hurricane. And a lot of what we were talking about is statistically Republicans have a greater turnout in events of extreme weather. And we were kind of thinking about why that is. And I think that's a class issue. If you get Republicans who are typically of a higher socioeconomic status and have more access to their own means of transportation, which means being able to have your own car and go out and vote, but if that isn't at your access, it's difficult to be able to even use those rights, and I think that's a way that class definitely impacts voice.
Hi guys, I'm Dan. The question I have for you, and something that was brought up in the last election, the race card. Right after the election in 2008, teachers were told that if you think about it, the impact of race, although it can be mostly used in a negative way, it can be used to an advantage to some people. And more specifically, what it is being referred to is that, and I know that people came up to me and said, it was like, oh, I'm going to vote for Barack Obama because he's black. We've never had a black president, and that's why I'm going to vote for him. What do you think that kind of mentality will have on, or the impact of that kind of mentality will have on this election, if it will have an impact at all?
Actually, I brought that topic up. I'm pretty sure that in the same instance of in 08, that the turnout for African Americans will probably be similar to that respect of in that respect to 2012 election. And you brought up the fact about individuals voted for Barack Obama because he was African American, which I could say which is true, because I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I came across that same experience myself. So I can actually say that some individuals actually done that to see the first African American president. And from a pessimistic view of that ideology of voting, I would say that individuals need to be more knowledgeable enough about politics, have more efficacy of the study, because if you just voting for someone with class, because of that race, then you really not engage in the best interests of American society.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a question that my group in Advanced Lab is dealing with. We're trying to see if race has an impact on how people vote, and it goes both ways, is what we're trying to look at. But I think the thing to consider is that it's not necessarily one-sided. I don't think that just because someone shares the same race that ultimately decides their vote, or that it wouldn't be the opposite for a white candidate. But a white candidate would assume, well, I share similar values, I'm going to vote for Mitt Romney.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating issue. I'm hopeful that one day we're going to have enough women and we're going to have enough minorities who are running for office that this just won't be a problem anymore, that you're just going to have a really nice mix of candidates one day.
Well, it's also interesting because some people feel that that actually created a higher standard for what the expectations for Obama during his presidency were, because people were seeing him as the only representative, as the exception. So he had to be this great, amazing president. And a lot of people were worried, at least in my community, which is an inner city that was predominantly Black and Latino, people were worried that if something went wrong during his presidency, we wouldn't see another minority in office for a very long time.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I am a freshman. Okay, so I have 3-ish questions. Okay, first of all, I'm really good friend Spencer. He brought up the point of, Robbie never said, oh, he just was supporting marriage. I think that raises an important point of, is that, like, what does it mean to be a citizen, and does denying someone marriage, decrease their citizenship, and is the denying the marriage enough of an insult, enough of a decitizenizing force in and of itself? Love Spence. Number 2, the point Julia brought up for our class, Dr. Matthews. She made us read the Republican Party platform. Well, she asked us to read it. And yeah, Julia is absolutely right. Their view on marriage equality was not friendly. And I'm wondering if Romney's link to the Republican Party, being a Republican candidate, even if he doesn't reiterate what's on the platform, just the length of being a Republican, is that enough for people to be like, oh my gosh, you hate people? And number 3, Matt brought up about Romney not mentioning it. I feel like that's just a broader thing of Romney and everyone just going back to economic issues. So that was really a question. But those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Melanie, I'm a senior, and in the 2008 election, I was talking to a 90-year-old woman who said she would rather vote for Obama, even though she didn't like that he was Black, because he's a man and she didn't want a woman as a president. So my question is, you guys said that the majority of voters are older and not so much younger, but so much of social media targets younger generations. So what is being done to target those older people who have those views that are not really good at the times?
I would say older people, all right. I would say older people, you're not going to sway them to vote a different way. I'm pretty sure they're stuck where they're at, so I don't see why the media would want to try to sway them. Older is not you, Dr. Matthews.
I don't think it's necessarily the targeting of the older population. I just think that it's the initiative and that the younger people are taking to actually get out and vote. So we talk about it, it's something that's in our face 24/7, but is everyone here registered to vote? Is everyone actually going to vote? Have people taken the necessary steps to make sure that they can vote? Like if you're registered in Pennsylvania, have you gotten your sticker on your ID card? These are things that are small things that might not allow you to vote in this election. It's something that we just should ignore.
Hi, I'm Connie Walsh. I haven't wanted a few comments there, so this is far less relevant than what we were just talking about. But it's interesting to me that I was thinking of what Dr. Hashim brought up about class, and it's interesting to me that we're going to focus on economics, and nobody's talking about class. And economics really has a lot to do with class. It's one interesting thought I had, and I think that because there's so much conversation about economics
and zero conversation about class, I think that's interesting. And I think one thing that Michaela made me remember is when Obama did make that fateful comment to Joe the plumber in the 2008 election of, well, some people, the wealthiest people in the country, they're going to have to spread some of the wealth around. And boom, he was a socialist for a little while, and then he was a Nazi, and then he was a socialist and a communist simultaneously. So I think for Barack Obama, I think class is probably the last thing that he wants to talk about anyway.
Yeah, he definitely has a slogan somewhat of identify himself and the upper class per se in terms of we can pay a little more, and so the fact that the way how he included himself inside that realm, somewhat trying to identify himself as I guess like somewhat upper class, not probably compared to Obama, but on the other side, Mitt Romney, in terms of individualism and how things, how America became prosperous, it's more individual create this idea or invention, things, we invest in that, and you build a business, and then you hire employees, and that's how the free market works. And so, so it's kind of it's kind of hard of bringing up that type of class, but both of the candidates do it in a very discreet way.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm from Southampton. I want to go back to one of the questions the person asked about Romney being a woman.
About what? Sorry?
Going back to the gay marriage thing. And Romney's a woman, but in the past we've had a lot of persons who are Protestant, and typically in Protestant religion they're usually not for gay rights or gay marriage or anything. And I wasn't sure if you think that because of that it's going to affect it because of the past. So is he a person that just happens to be a woman, or is he a person because he's a woman? If that makes sense.
Say the last part again, please.
So is he like he's a person, but he could be a person because he's a woman, or is it he just happens to be a woman? So like because of what's going on, because of the past, how persons were Protestant and they were for gay marriage, do you think it's going to affect what's going on now, or is it just he's just a religious thing? It's going to be a separation between church and state.
I think that it really has a lot less to do with his identity as a Mormon and more with his identity as a conservative and those values that he brings. I think that's what makes him appealing. I think because Mormonism is somewhat of a marginalized religion, he's kind of downplayed that and really emphasized his conservative values for the GOP.
We're going to take one more question, and then we'll go to concluding remarks. You're like, oh,
Just wanted to challenge everyone in the group to look at a slight microaggression that happened, which is we all laughed about the idea that older people are overtly sexist. And I think one of the things I invite us to think about is that older people are no more homogenized as a group than younger people are, or women are, or the Black vote is, or the Latino vote is. And so I want us to consider what Kelly was saying, which is that what you just described is a woman who's doing something overtly sexist. We can see it and we can call it out. We can all laugh and be like, oh, that's awful. What Michaela was talking about is more insidious sexism and insidious racism, insidious classism. That's much harder to point out, and I think in some ways a lot more toxic. So I'd say don't give up on the overvote, because I've seen just as many older people change their minds about sexism and racism as early as 90, as late as 90, 95. And I've seen younger people stay staunch in ideologies that are prejudicial. So I invite you to think about, and maybe comment as a group, as that, we have overt racism and covert. They're both propaganda, both influencing the election. So, thanks.
So
So I'm going to invite our panelists if they want to respond, and then maybe if they have any remarks they'd like to make by way of conclusion, and I know Justin has a few final words to say, so I'm just going to turn it back to you then. Thanks.
Okay, I don't have anything to say aside from, yeah, that's truth that happened, and we have to be aware of it. It's kind of hard sometimes because it's just something that happens. The only way to make yourself aware is to go out and learn and take classes and learn things and talk about those sorts of things. In general, I think it's past the point where you guys can register to vote. So if you have registered to vote, make sure that you get out there and vote and have these conversations with people. There's also this really cool thing that's going on our campus tonight. Actually, there's a training session for people who want to, who are going to serve as translators for Latino voters in downtown. So if you can make it out to that, do that because it's awesome, it's great, and it's an important vote. So do that.
Yeah, Kate, I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's really important. I think the way that people change their minds is that they learn about both sides equally. So just because you grew up in a household where you were just bombarded with one side of an issue doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn about the other side. And then you can make up your own mind. I mean, my dad is a staunch Republican, and my mom's a pretty moderate Democrat. So all of our dinner conversations were just them arguing all the time, and I was caught in the middle. So I feel like that's nice. And you don't always have to stick to your party too. This idea of just sticking to party lines is creating so many problems. It's okay to sway over on some issues. So I encourage everyone to just learn about both sides.
I just want to say that, it says the young grow old, they grow wiser. And so speaking about that, the older vote changing their minds, when you bring up the issues of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and you start to pitch in or talk about, changing that type of system or taking away some things involved in that system, and you talking about a very large population that, when they retire, they, draw that money from that. So, obviously the candidates are very careful in trying to deal with tweaking that system. And so that could be a big change in the older vote.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to reiterate what everybody else said, but when you do go out and vote, I think it's important to really think about these issues that we've talked about today, and when you're voting for candidates, any party, really thinking about the issues that are important to you and kind of checking in with your emotions and how that may affect the way that you vote.
Well, I want to first of all thank the Political Science Department and the media for putting together this wonderful panel. I think that this is a part of a larger series, terrific series that's been going on leading up to the election, and I believe that we're going to even have a discussion after the election. More importantly, I want to thank our discussants. I thought you guys did a wonderful job, and I want to thank all of you all. As you see, we were not trying to be experts up here. More than anything, we wanted students to kind of lead a discussion amongst students and faculty to kind of get us thinking about things. And in way of summary, I just want to say that I think that the comments that were given by both our discussants and the audience kind of raise this question of ultimately what kind of society do we want to live in. And I think that when you cast your vote, in some sense, you are asking that question. And who do you think can get you to that kind of society? And I think that some of our comments raise certain themes, right? I think first and foremost is this kind of theme of silence. When are issues being talked about and when they're silent? So whether it's the issue of class or when it's an issue that is being raised, but there's these deep intersectionalities, right? So one thing I'm thinking about is the gun laws. We talked about the gun laws. But the gun laws issue, which was interesting, was that I think the second debate, right, when an audience member asked a question about gun laws and what the candidates would do, one of the interesting answers that was given by both candidates, right, Romney did it first, and then Obama had to kind of show up his staunchness, which was we need to strengthen the families, right? that part of the reason that we have so much gun violence is because we have single mothers, raising wayward kids, basically, right? And so here's an issue, very clear social issue about gun control, and the answer becomes one of class, single parenthood, living in poverty, raising bad kids, one of race, because these are keys, these are signifiers, right? That what we're talking about, and Obama singled himself out, right? I'm from Chicago, right? People are killing each other, and it's the issue of race and class that are intersecting there, right? So there are these moments when there seems to be silence, right? When it comes to the issues of class or race, but they're always there. And so I like the point that Michaela was making about this idea of we're trying to create an open dialogue, right? An honest and open dialogue about these issues and try to put them to the fore. And one of the reasons that we want to have this discussion right before the election is that we can kind of put these issues out there that you can think about in a very purposeful way before you cast your vote. I thought that Terrence raised some really good questions about what happens, right? What does it say about society when one race overwhelmingly votes for one party time and time again? And it goes both ways, right? As he pointed out, what it would take for Romney to win, and what kind of vote he can expect, and then what it takes for Obama, what kind of vote that he can expect, and how does that divide racial lines? And I think that this, raises a really good question again about what kind of society we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where one race overwhelmingly votes, for one party, and in particular a black candidate, and where one race, overwhelmingly votes for a white candidate and one party? What does this say about the society that we're living in? I thought Lindsay's comments were really good about thinking about social issues and economic issues, and is there an economy, and does one and should one have a priority over the other? And I think some of the comments that you guys made in the audience were really good in terms of, not only should there be an economy, but also what does it say about our idea of citizenship, right? When we're forced to make this kind of dichotomous decision, right? You can either vote based upon my pocket, or I can vote based upon social issues, and I'm kind of forced to do one or the other. And what happens when I have to put my civil liberties on hold? What does that say about my status as a citizen in society overall? And finally, I'm not going to get your name right. I'm sorry. Nashalisa's comments about the Hispanic vote, I think, again, raised this question about are there homogenous groups, right? And I think that this was a theme that came up again and again. Can we talk about the Hispanic vote as if it's a homogenous group? And again, what kind of things are being done to play to certain votes, right? Obama very timely dedicates the Cesar Chavez monument, right? And there's this question, is he pandering to the Hispanic vote and things of that nature? So I really want to thank you all. I thought you guys raised some really, really good points and had a really good discussion. And I appreciate both the audience and our panelists for this. Thank you so very much.